Hey, 6-8, happy Wednesday. Let's get right into it today. We're going to look at how this passage applies to my church family. Have we not all one Father? Not going to read the whole thing, by the way. Most of it, but not all of it. Have we all not one Father? Has not one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judah has been faithless, and abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. May the Lord cut off from the tents of Jacob any descendant of the man who does this, who brings an offering to the Lord of hosts. And the second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favor from your hand. But you say, why does he not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. He did not make them one with a portion of the Spirit. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. So guard yourselves in your spirit, and let none of you be faithless to the wife of your youth. I just want to jump back. Said, why then, verse 10, why then, don't we have one Father and one God created us? Why then are we faithless to one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers? I think there's a couple of ways we can apply this passage to my church family. First, are we being faithful or faithless to one another in this godly kingdom that we are part of? Look, he's talking about how the people of Israel were faithless to one another by profaning the covenant of our fathers. One of the ways that we are faithful to one another in the body of Christ is by being faithful to the covenants of Christ, by living those out. And as we live out the promises of God, as we live out what God has given us to do and commanded us to do, we are being faithful to one another. And by breaking those covenants, breaking those promises, we're not just breaking the promises to God, we're being faithless to each other. So are we being faithless in the way we're breaking the covenants? Because what you do, how you live your life, doesn't just affect you and your life and even your family, but what you does affects the body of Christ. Your representation of Christ affects the rest of the body of Christ. How are you being faithful and keeping that covenant that you have entered into with Jesus Christ? So there's that. The other thing I think that we can look at is, are we in relationship with one another that we're able to point out when somebody is going down the wrong path? You know, they were breaking these covenants. They were breaking the covenant. They were marrying daughters of foreign gods. Did they not have relationship with one another? Was there not someone who was living out the covenant, and they were trying to live out the covenant together, and they noticed someone, hey, you're breaking this promise. You're about to break this promise by marrying this girl who's from a daughter of a foreign god. You're about to break this promise. Stop it. Don't do it. Let's fix this. You know, don't break the covenant. Do what God has commanded us to do. Do the right thing. Let's fix this. Are we in relationship with one another? We're able to see those kinds of things and help point them out so that we can actually help one another better reflect Jesus Christ to the world as the body of Christ. Together, the collective body of Christ, together we represent Christ to the world, and what we do affects each other. So what you do affects me, and what I do affects you. So there's that. But then the last thing I just want to point out, being faithful in our marriages. Faithful to the wife of your youth. We've entered into a covenant with our wives, faithful in our covenants, faithful in the covenant to one another. Are we being faithful? And if we're noticing something, if we see something, do we address it? Do we help each other fulfill these covenants? It's a lot easier to address something when it's small than to let it grow up and become a huge thing that's, like dropping, it's like blowing something up. Can we address it while it's small? Before the snowball rolls down the hill, can we address it and save a lot of people, a lot of heartache? Are you being faithful to the wife of your youth? Are you being faithful to your husband? Are you being faithful to your kids? Are you being faithful to God? Are you being faithful to this church that you're in a covenantal relationship? Are you being faithful or faithless? I think those are some practical ways we can look at that and apply it to our church, because we don't want God to stop blessing our offerings. We don't want God to stop blessing what we give to Him, what we bring into the community, and how we offer ourselves up in service to the community around us. We don't want God to stop blessing that. We want God to always be blessing that. So are we doing anything in our midst that's keeping God from offering His blessing? Because if we're helping one another be faithful to fulfill the covenant, then God's hand will be on us. I think those are some ways we can apply that today. Have a great Wednesday. We'll see you tomorrow for another tip.